Introduction: a look into the most dangerous prison units. Designed solely for serial killers. Prisons are meant to contain and rehabilitate criminals, but when it comes to serial killers, rehabilitation is rarely an option. These are individuals who have committed some of the most heinous crimes imaginable, often repeatedly, with a complete disregard for human life. Because of their extreme danger to society, and even to other inmates, serial killers are often placed in the most secure prison units, designed specifically to keep them isolated and under constant surveillance. These specialized prison units, often found within maximum security or supermax prisons, are built to ensure that the most dangerous killers remain locked away with no chance of harming anyone again. They are designed with heavy fortifications, including thick concrete walls, soundproofing, limited or no human contact, and advanced security systems that monitor every move the inmate makes. The goal is not just to confine these individuals, but to prevent them from continuing their violent tendencies, even within prison walls. One of the most notorious prisons housing serial killers is ADX Florence in Colorado, USA, also known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. This supermax facility holds some of the most dangerous criminals in American history, including serial killers, terrorists, and organized crime leaders. Inmates are kept in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day, with only 1 hour of outdoor exercise in a small caged area. The cells are designed to minimize interaction with guards and other inmates, ensuring that these individuals remain completely isolated. Another infamous facility is Black Dolphin Prison in Russia, considered one of the toughest prisons in the world. Here, serial killers are subjected to extreme conditions, including blindfolded transfers, 24/7 surveillance, and strict daily routines designed to break any sense of autonomy. Prisoners are required to walk bent over at the waist when moving through the facility, preventing them from attacking guards or other inmates. The prison is home to some of Russia's most notorious murderers, and escape is virtually impossible. The justification for such extreme measures lies in the nature of serial killers themselves. Unlike ordinary criminals, serial killers often display psychopathic tendencies, an inability to feel remorse, and a high likelihood of reoffending. Even behind bars, they may attempt to manipulate fellow inmates, orchestrate crimes, or even kill again. Some serial killers have managed to continue their killing sprees while incarcerated, proving that traditional prison settings are not sufficient to contain them. However, the existence of these high-security prison units raises ethical questions. Are such extreme levels of isolation a form of psychological torture? Do these conditions serve justice, or do they dehumanize even the worst of criminals? While some argue that serial killers deserve no sympathy, others believe that long-term solitary confinement can be inhumane, even for the most dangerous offenders. Ultimately, the worst prison units designed for serial killers serve a dual purpose, ensuring public safety and preventing further violence within prison walls. These facilities are some of the most secure places on Earth, built with the sole purpose of keeping the most dangerous human beings locked away forever. Selection process: how authorities decide. Which serial killers belong in these extreme prisons? Not every serial killer is sent to the most extreme prison units. Authorities follow a strict selection process to determine which offenders require the highest level of security and isolation. This process involves evaluating the criminal's history, psychological profile, behavior in prison, and the potential risk they pose to others. Serial killers who are deemed especially dangerous, unpredictable, or likely to reoffend, even behind bars, are placed in supermax prisons or specialized high-security units. 1. Nature and severity of crimes. One of the first factors authorities consider is the nature and brutality of the crimes committed. Serial killers who have demonstrated extreme violence, sadistic tendencies, or an unusually high number of victims are more likely to be placed in the most secure facilities. Those who have committed high-profile crimes, such as killing law enforcement officers or targeting vulnerable populations, are also given special consideration for extreme incarceration. For example, serial killers like Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer were placed in high-security prisons because their crimes were not only brutal, but also widely publicized, making them high-risk inmates. 2. Psychological evaluation and risk assessment authorities conduct in-depth psychological evaluations to determine if an inmate poses a continuous threat, even while incarcerated. Many serial killers exhibit psychopathic traits, including a lack of remorse, manipulative behavior, and violent fantasies. Prison psychologists assess whether these individuals are capable of forming alliances with other criminals, influencing inmates, or attempting to kill again. A history of extreme sadism, necrophilia, or cannibalism, traits found in killers like Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, and Albert Fish, often leads to stricter confinement due to their inability to control violent impulses. 3. History of violence in prison. Some serial killers may initially be placed in high-security prisons but later transferred to supermax facilities due to their behavior behind bars. Those who attack guards, kill fellow inmates, or attempt to escape are immediately considered for maximum isolation. A prime example is Pedro Rodrigues Filho, a Brazilian serial killer who, while imprisoned, continued to murder other criminals, especially those who had committed violent crimes against women and children. Such inmates are often placed in permanent solitary confinement to prevent further violence. 4. Escape risk and intelligence level authorities also assess whether a serial killer has the intelligence, resources, or network to attempt an escape. Highly intelligent killers, such as Ted Bundy, who successfully escaped prison twice, are considered high risk and require additional security measures. Serial killers with known connections to organized crime, gangs, or cults are also monitored closely, as they may have outside help to orchestrate an escape. 5. Influence over other inmates. Some serial killers, despite being in prison, continue to exert influence over others. Individuals like Charles Manson, who led a cult that carried out murders on his behalf, posed a significant risk even behind bars. Prison authorities monitor inmates who show signs of manipulation, leadership, or the ability to radicalize others, and they are often placed in isolation to prevent them from continuing their influence. 6. Special circumstances and public pressure. In some cases, public outrage and media attention play a role in the selection process. High-profile serial killers who have traumatized a nation may be placed in the most secure prisons to ensure they never have a chance to communicate with the outside world. Additionally, government policies and legal requirements influence whether a serial killer is eligible for a supermax facility or solitary confinement. Conclusion: the selection process for placing serial killers in extreme prison units is thorough and based on multiple factors, including the severity of their crimes, psychological risk, prison behavior, escape potential, and influence over others. These prisons are designed to contain the most dangerous individuals, ensuring they can never harm society again. While some argue that such extreme incarceration is inhumane, authorities justify these measures as necessary to maintain order, protect other inmates, and prevent further violence. Daily life, the harsh routines, isolation, and psychological impact on inmates. Life inside the world's most extreme prison units for serial killers is designed to be as restrictive and isolating as possible. Unlike general population prisons, where inmates can socialize, work, and participate in activities, these special units impose near-total isolation. Every aspect of daily life is controlled to minimize the risk of violence, escape, or influence over others. For serial killers housed in these facilities, the experience is often described as worse than death itself. 1. Harsh routines and strict schedules. Serial killers in extreme prison units follow a rigid daily schedule with almost no variation. The goal is to limit their interaction with others and prevent any possibility of them forming connections or planning violence. 23-hour lockdown. Inmates are confined to their small windowless cells for 23 hours a day, with only 1 hour of exercise. Meals in solitude. Food is delivered through a small slot in the door. Inmates are not allowed to eat in common areas. No contact with other inmates. Interaction with other prisoners is either completely prohibited or heavily restricted. Limited human interaction. Communication with guards is minimal and usually occurs through intercoms or small cell openings. Prisons like ADX Florence in the US and Black Dolphin in Russia enforce these routines with military precision, ensuring that serial killers have no opportunity to engage in violent or manipulative behavior. 2. Extreme isolation and sensory deprivation. One of the most punishing aspects of these prison units is the near-total isolation. Serial killers placed in solitary confinement experience severe sensory deprivation, which can have long-term psychological consequences. No windows or natural light. Many cells are designed to prevent inmates from seeing the outside world. No television or social interaction. Some prisons allow limited television or radio access, but others completely restrict these privileges. Soundproofed cells. In some cases, cells are built to reduce noise, further increasing the sense of isolation. Restricted reading material. Inmates may only be allowed books that are pre-approved by prison authorities. Studies show that long-term solitary confinement can lead to hallucinations, paranoia, severe depression, and even suicidal tendencies. Many serial killers, despite their lack of empathy, eventually break down under these conditions. 3. The psychological impact on serial killers. Even the most hardened serial killers are not immune to the effects of extreme confinement. While some adapt to the isolation, others spiral into mental instability, paranoia, and psychosis. Many inmates begin to experience paranoia, believing they are being watched or conspired against. Depersonalization. After years in solitary confinement, some lose their sense of identity and reality. Suicidal thoughts and self-harm. The overwhelming isolation often leads to depression and, in some cases, suicide. Infamous serial killer Robert Maudsley, known as Hannibal the Cannibal, has spent over 40 years in solitary confinement, with reports of him deteriorating mentally over time. Loss of speech and social skills. With no interaction, some prisoners lose the ability to hold normal conversations. Despite their violent nature, even serial killers can suffer under these extreme conditions, leading to debates about the ethics of such treatment. 4. Physical deterioration and health issues. The harsh environment of these prison units also affects inmates' physical health. Muscle atrophy. Due to limited movement, many inmates experience muscle weakness and deterioration. Weakened immune system. Poor diet and lack of sunlight contribute to a weaker immune system. Mental breakdown. Leading to physical illness. The mind-body connection means that prolonged stress can lead to real physical illnesses. Some prisoners, like Charles Manson, who spent decades in high-security confinement, reportedly suffered from severe health issues in their later years. 5. The rare moments of freedom. For those who earn privileges, even the smallest things can feel like a luxury. 1 hour of exercise. The only break from isolation is a short period in an enclosed outdoor area, often referred to as a concrete cage. Limited mail and phone calls. Some prisons allow heavily monitored communication with family or lawyers. Occasional visits, behind glass or video call. Physical contact is usually prohibited, and all visits take place through a glass barrier or video call. Daily life for serial killers in extreme prison units is designed to break their ability to harm others, escape, or influence anyone. The combination of strict routines, harsh isolation, and psychological pressure ensures that these individuals remain powerless. However, these extreme conditions also raise ethical questions about whether such treatment constitutes psychological torture. Regardless, for the world's most notorious serial killers, these prison units serve as a final, inescapable cage, one from which they will never be free. Notorious inmates, profiles of infamous serial killers housed in these units. Some of the world's most dangerous serial killers are locked away in the most secure prison units, where they are kept under extreme isolation and constant surveillance. These individuals committed horrific crimes, showing no remorse for their victims. Due to their high risk of reoffending, escaping, or influencing others, they were placed in supermax prisons and special isolation units designed to ensure they never pose a threat again. Here are some of the most infamous serial killers housed in these extreme prison units. 1. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. ADX Florence, USA, Carves. Kaczynski was a domestic terrorist and serial bomber who killed 3 people and injured 23 over nearly 2 decades. Prison, housed at ADX Florence, the most secure prison in the United States. Conditions, spent 23 hours a day in solitary confinement with no direct human contact. His only form of exercise was in a small enclosed yard. Outcome, Kaczynski was found dead in his cell in 2023, reportedly from suicide. 2. Robert Maudsley, Hannibal the Cannibal. Wakefield Prison, UK crimes. Convicted of 4 murders, including fellow prisoners. Known for his cannibalistic tendencies, he allegedly ate part of one victim's brain. Prison, held in a glass-walled solitary confinement cell in Wakefield Prison, often referred to as the Hannibal Cage. Conditions, has been in solitary confinement for over 40 years, making him one of the longest-serving isolated prisoners. Psychological state. Reports suggest his mental health deteriorated significantly due to extreme isolation. 3. Mikhail Popkov, the Werewolf. Black Dolphin Prison, Russia crimes. A former Russian police officer turned serial killer, Popkov was convicted of killing 83 women, but claims to have murdered over 100. Prison, held at Black Dolphin Prison, Russia's most secure prison. Conditions, inmates are forced to walk bent over at the waist when being transported, are kept under 24/7 surveillance, and are locked in tiny, high-security cells. Outcome, sentenced to life in prison, with no possibility of parole. 4. Charles Cullen, New Jersey State Prison, USA crimes. A former nurse who murdered at least 29 patients by poisoning them with lethal drug overdoses. Experts believe the real number could be over 400. Prison, serving multiple life sentences in New Jersey State Prison's high-security unit. Conditions, spends most of his time in a single cell, with restricted access to other prisoners to prevent harm. Outcome, will never be released and has shown no remorse for his crimes. 5. Luis Garavito, the Beast. La Tramacua Prison, Colombia crimes. Garavito was a Colombian serial killer and child molester who raped, tortured, and murdered over 190 children. Prison, held in La Tramacua Prison, one of Colombia's harshest facilities. Conditions, originally sentenced to 1,853 years in prison, but due to Colombian laws, his sentence was reduced to 40 years, with no possibility of parole due to his extreme crimes. Outcome, died in 2023 while still incarcerated. 6. Richard Cottingham, the Torso Killer. Southwoods State Prison, USA crimes. Murdered and dismembered at least 17 women in the 1970s, earning his nickname due to his method of decapitating victims. Prison, serving multiple life sentences in Southwood State Prison under strict security measures. Conditions, isolated from the general prison population to prevent attacks or further violence. Current status, still alive, with more crimes being uncovered even decades after his capture. 7. Niels Högel, Oldenburg Prison, Germany, crimes. A former nurse who murdered at least 85 patients by injecting them with lethal drugs. Prison, serving life in solitary confinement in Oldenburg Prison, Germany. Conditions, strict supervision to prevent self-harm or escape attempts. Outcome, will never be released, as he is considered one of Europe's worst medical serial killers. Conclusion, these notorious serial killers are housed in some of the world's most secure and isolated prison units to ensure they can never harm anyone again. Many of them live in complete isolation, experiencing severe psychological effects due to their crimes and imprisonment. While some believe these extreme prison conditions are justified, others argue that such levels of isolation border on psychological torture. Regardless, these criminals will spend the rest of their lives in these inescapable prison units, locked away forever. Conclusion, the effectiveness of extreme prisons in preventing further violence. The world's most secure prison units, designed specifically for serial killers, serve a crucial purpose: to isolate the most dangerous criminals and prevent them from harming others, whether inside or outside prison walls. These extreme facilities, such as ADX Florence, USA, Black Dolphin Prison, Russia, and Wakefield Prison, UK, enforce strict routines, near total isolation, and round the clock surveillance to ensure that the most violent offenders never have an opportunity to kill again. But how effective are these prisons in actually preventing further violence? 1. Stopping serial killers from reoffending. One of the biggest justifications for these prisons is that serial killers, unlike ordinary criminals, have an extremely high likelihood of reoffending. Their crimes are often driven by deep psychological urges, making them a permanent threat to society and even to fellow inmates. Serial killers who continued to kill in prison, like Pedro Rodrigues Filho in Brazil, prove that standard prison security is sometimes not enough. Supermax and high-security prisons eliminate this risk by enforcing 23-hour solitary confinement, limited movement, and zero physical contact with other inmates. Success rate. Once placed in these facilities, serial killers never kill again, effectively removing them from society's reach. 2. Reducing prison violence and gang influence. Even in high-security prisons, criminals can form alliances, run illegal operations, and incite violence. Serial killers with manipulative tendencies, like Charles Manson, have historically influenced other inmates and even coordinated crimes from behind bars. By placing them in total isolation, these prisons cut off any external communication, preventing them from recruiting followers or ordering attacks. Effectiveness. The strict one inmate per cell policy and limited human contact make it virtually impossible for these criminals to spread their influence. 3. Preventing escapes and future threats. Serial killers with high intelligence or connections, like Ted Bundy, who escaped twice, pose a major threat even after their arrest. Standard prisons often fail to prevent high-risk inmates from plotting escapes, bribing guards, or finding loopholes in security. Supermax prisons have nearly zero escape attempts due to their fortified cells, remote locations, and high-tech surveillance systems. Inmates are constantly monitored through motion sensors, infrared cameras, and restricted movement policies. No reported successful escape from prisons like ADX Florence or Black Dolphin, proving their effectiveness in keeping serial killers locked away permanently. The psychological and ethical debate. While these prisons are effective in preventing further violence, they raise serious ethical concerns regarding human rights and psychological torture. Long-term solitary confinement can cause severe mental deterioration, even in the most remorseless criminals. Many inmates suffer from hallucinations, paranoia, depression, and suicidal thoughts. Some argue that prolonged isolation is inhumane, even for serial killers, as it deprives them of basic human interaction. However, prison officials defend the system, stating that these measures are necessary to protect society and maintain prison safety. Final verdict. Are these prisons effective? Yes. Supermax and high-security prison units have proven to be extremely effective in preventing further violence. Serial killers placed in these facilities never kill again, have no chance to escape, and are unable to influence others. Their isolation neutralizes their threat permanently, ensuring public safety. However, the debate over the psychological impact of such extreme imprisonment continues. While society may have no sympathy for serial killers, the question remains: is complete isolation the best form of justice, or does it cross the line into cruel and unusual punishment? Regardless of the ethical debate, one thing is clear. For the worst serial killers, these prisons are the final stop, the place where their reign of terror ends forever.